Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to Kellogg College. Welcome to the Global Centre on Healthcare and Urbanisation, GCHU. My name's Juliette Carpenter. I'm Director of Research here at the GCHU. And I'm delighted to welcome for this, our last seminar of the term, Lydia Manzo, who is a visiting research associate with GCHU. She comes from the University of Milan. She's an associate professor in sociology at the University of Milan, and her particular interests are in health and housing, and she's been working with colleagues here over the term on issues of health and housing. And so she's chosen the topic for tonight, and she'll be chairing around the question, why should we care about healthy homes? So I'll hand over to Lydia to chair the session and introduce the four speakers. So thanks very much. Thanks a lot.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Yes, thank you, Juliet, for the introduction. It is truly a pleasure to have you all here today for what promises to be an insightful and meaningful discussion. And before we dive in, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to the Center for the opportunity to be here today and supported by the Visiting Research Associate Fellowship, and also deeply thankful to Postdoc Fellow Hannah Grove for our ongoing collaboration and support within Ireland and the UK. Today, I'm delighted to chair this public seminar that boldly asks, why should we care about healthier homes? A question that resonates deeply with all of us. Housing quality has a profound impact on health, and we are only just beginning to fully understand the extent of this connection. The COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare on how poor housing conditions such as overcrowding, damp, mold, cold, and pests can worsen health inequalities, particularly for social housing residents. For many of them, these issues are not occasional problems, but daily realities. The challenge we now face is how to create healthier living environments that not only address the physical condition of homes, but also foster better mental health and well-being for their occupants. Here we have a few images from the We Are Sick Waiting campaign, which captures the struggle of residents at Oliver Bond House in Dublin. This is part of my EU Marie Curie project, City of Care, comparing housing and health conditions in Dublin and Milan. I initially designed this project before the pandemic, with the goal of building healthier, more supportive cities. However, when I finally arrived in Dublin in 2021, I encountered the harsh reality at Oliver Bond House, a place where poor housing directly contributes to poor health. This became a pivotal moment for me as a researcher. I couldn't simply observe. I had to take responsibility for the research and its potential contribution to the residents' effort for change. As a social researcher, I believe that care in research is not just an abstract concept. It's an active and embodied responsibility that shapes the way we build relationships with participants. Through this approach, I want to emphasize that caring is essential in the fight for healthier, more equitable living environments. So today we have an excellent lineup of speakers, each bringing a unique perspective and wealth of experience on the topic. After their presentation, we will open the floor for questions and a broader discussion. Let me introduce you all of them. Our first speaker is Susan Smith, Honorary Professor of Geography at Cambridge University and President-elect of the British Academy. Susan is a distinguished expert who has made significant contribution to understanding how housing affects health outcomes. She will kick off our seminar by offering a broad overview of the links between housing and health, with a particular focus on why a new approach viewing housing as an infrastructure of care is essential and what it will take to make that happen. Next, we are pleased to welcome Ken Gibb, Professor of Housing Economics at the University of Glasgow and Director of the UK Collaborative Centre for Housing Evidence, CASH. Ken will discuss the economic aspects of the relationship between housing and health. He will focus on the financial implications of inadequate housing, looking at both the cost savings in healthcare and the energy efficiency of homes, with insight drawn from his research in Glasgow, including housing retrofitting projects aimed at improving health outcomes. Following Ken, we have Virginia Barbaro, manager at Aller Milano, the regional public housing agency in Milan. Virginia will share a fascinating pilot innovative project aimed at integrating physical and mental health services within vulnerable social housing areas of the city. This project is an excellent example of how local initiatives can directly improve the well-being of residents, providing essential services in a way that is accessible and community-focused. Finally, we're excited to hear from Jamie Ho Egan, Director and Retrofit Coordinator at Transition by Design, based here in Oxford. Semi Jo, an architect with experience in both the UK and internationally, will present on physical building refurbishment with a focus on retrofitting and the participatory approach that engage the community. Her work emphasizes the importance of sustainability and community involvement once again in creating healthier living spaces. Each of our speakers will present for about 5 minutes, after which we will open up for questions from the audience. There will be an interactive discussion, so please think about any question you want to or comments you want to have as the presentation unfolds. Without further ado, the floor is yours, Susan. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and thanks for having me this afternoon. I'm really looking forward to the discussion, and I'll try and keep my little intervention or provocation fairly short. I want to just elaborate the title a bit. I'm going to think about why and how should we care about healthier homes. And I haven't got any slides because I'm really just going to tell a story, or at least I'm going to start a story, and I'm not quite sure what the ending will be, but maybe after the discussion we'll have a better idea. So my story really starts with the earliest housing interventions from the 1850s in the UK, which were driven by a concern about public health. They came in the form of public health acts, tackling building standards, water supply, drainage, and so on. And Housing for Health from the very start was a cross-sector, interdisciplinary, infrastructural enterprise. And that's part of the how I think we've got to hang on to. It's a multiple discipline engaging project. Later, by the 1920s in Britain and more widely after the 1940s, in response to very poor housing conditions and chronic undersupply, state house building and social ownership got underway. So that means that about a century ago, governments began to acknowledge the very special qualities of housing. Qualities that goods produced and consumed in markets don't often have, social costs and benefits that pricing doesn't capture, qualities about housing that explain why we can and should care about healthier homes. And these special features of housing enable governments to argue not only that it might be appropriate to suspend the price mechanism in certain settings so that we could allocate homes according to need, not just ability to pay, but also that housing interventions themselves could be used to meet social as well as economic aims, including health and well-being. In the UK, therefore, to take an example, which built the largest council estate in the world in 1921, social housing allocation models were driven for many years precisely by medical priority for rehousing, a process by which households with a range of health and mobility needs were offered priority access to council-rented homes that were regarded as therapeutic and enabling. We can talk about the impact of that style of housing for health. It is quite mixed, but nevertheless, in a series of studies using panel survey data that I've been involved in with my colleagues Rachel Ongvai-Forge and Gavin Wood, we've shown with big panel surveys across a number of countries the many dimensions and enduring legacy of that kind of health selectivity out of the big sector owner occupation and into the smaller sector social housing, a sort of health selective process that occurs. And it chimes in really neatly with a roundup of trends over the past 20 years in the UK, using an annual population survey that colleagues Emily Grundy and Mike Murphy have recently done. And they've shown that as a result of this health selective sifting and sorting, self-reported health conditions and disabilities have become increasingly concentrated in the social sector over time, and social renters report a much higher incidence of adverse health conditions, especially mental health conditions and disabilities, than owner-occupiers, for example. So you could say, good story, so far so good. People with health and accessibility needs are accommodated by states that care, rather than left to the vagaries of markets that may or may not work. And it's important to recognise that this really matters to the public. Some colleagues in Australia, Emma Baker and colleagues, have just taken data from Gallup poll for 160,000 nearly individuals in 32 countries between 2016 and 2022, and they've shown that housing insecurity, which has far-reaching implications for life satisfaction, is powerfully mediated by these tenure differences. Countries with a larger social housing stock show less widespread housing insecurity and less damage to life satisfaction, especially amongst socio-economically disadvantaged groups. But there's a terrible paradox here, as the City of Care programme recognises, which is that in the post-1980s period, welfare states have rolled back to the extent that social sectors are really struggling to provide this careful housing that we've been expecting. Labels like housing for health and healthy housing can't really be applied to that sector anymore. But we've got this massive sector owner occupation, which is selective against health and disability needs. And the alternative, private renting, generally contains the worst quality housing, the least financial and tenure security, and the most steeply rising costs. I'm getting to the end. What to do of the story? The obvious answer, isn't it? The answer on everyone's lips is let's build more and better social housing and improve what we've got. Let's formalise those special qualities of housing, position it as a human right, and create space to accommodate it, along with all those other things that people, philosophers like Michael Sandel, argue that money should not be able to buy. It's a lovely idea. We should discuss it. But there's massive lock-in of vested interests to the present status quo. So I'm wondering about, something, a different way in, something perhaps even more pragmatic. It certainly would be good to have more social housing. But, given the narrative, the story so far shouldn't be a little bit wary, perhaps, of returning to the idea of one sector for the needy provided by states that care and markets that work for some, not others. So my alternative is to free up the institutional imaginary sufficiently to recognise those special qualities of housing in a different way. I think we should dare to believe that we can build capacity for enabling therapeutic, health-promoting homes across the piece, across all sectors. That is, turn the entire housing system into an infrastructure of care. Now, I realise this is a very big ask, but an ethic of care, which is what we need, has been largely a feminist project. It is not a genteel suggestion from a bunch of well-meaning women about how to be kinder to others. It's a very powerful political project with an eye to transforming the future, just as the welfare ideal transformed the past. Engaging with an ethic of care, which many of us have been talking about, demands that we recognise the interdependency of all human life within and between generations. It forces us to acknowledge how ludicrous it is to think that a stock of housing created by the labour, the resources, the materials, and often the public investments of the past is ours to own for our own gain, whether as individuals or institutions, often at the expense of future generations. And if we believe this, which I certainly do, it paves the way to rethink and reform property taxes, because they're regressive and irrational, to create a new flow of funds for housing that doesn't wholly depend on private investment, that can prioritise not-for-profit, and that could therefore drive a phase of infrastructural reinvestment and renewal. It paves the way for a round of regulation to limit the value that investors can extract from the sector. It's all about interdisciplinarity and cross-sectoral working for the future. And it means that faced with a question like, why should we care about healthier homes? We can not only say, inspired by a different vision for the future, because it's the right thing to do, we can also, energized by the renewed capacity that we can generate, say, because we can. Thank you.
It's quite difficult to follow on from that, actually. That's fantastic. So yeah, my name's Ken Gibb. I work at the University of Glasgow. I'm a housing economist, and by that I mean a microeconomist. I'm interested in individuals and markets and institutions and how they aggregate in some sort of sense. And actually, it's only really in the last 7 or 8 years that I've been actively involved in what you might call the housing health interface. I generally do the sort of economics of housing policy, about the design of policy, about the problems with existing and evaluations of policy. But in recent years, I've actually moved on a bit, thankfully. Otherwise, you'd be wondering why I was here. So these are just 3 examples of things that we've been doing recently. About 5 years ago, we did some work for the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations, as a trade body, the Public Health Scotland, and Joseph Rowntree Foundation, where we were trying to quantify and review the literature and the evidence about the impacts that social housing has beyond the immediate things of meeting need. And that led to quite a long dialogue about housing and health and some of the complexities of understanding the relationship there. And I actually think what that's about is the sense that both housing and, from an economist's point of view, both housing and health are complex activities. There's a lot of state intervention in both. They don't really follow simplistic analysis, sort of economics 101 type work. You have to really dig into it, and it's quite hard to do. Putting both together is always going to be a challenge. Secondly, again, something I hadn't really worked in before until 2020 was decarbonising the housing stock, retrofit and those things, and where housing and health butt up together very closely. And we did a 4-year study in the end of a social housing Victorian tenement retrofit, a deep green retrofit, which involved all sorts of multidisciplinary analysis, including a cost-benefit analysis that I did. It was my first ever cost-benefit analysis, and now I can't seem to stop doing them. And the third one is, for me, the most exciting one in some respects, because I'm doing it right now. I'm working with colleagues who are health economists at Glasgow, and we've gone right back to that basic question. Does different levels of housing quality impact on health outcomes, both physical health and mental well-being? And we're just starting that work, actually. But it's really interesting to work with a health economist who's imbued in her sort of model of the world and how it operates, and myself chasing behind trying to say, well, housing is quite complicated and things like that. But we're having a really interesting time. And what we're doing just now is we're trying to really understand what the meta evidence says about these questions, both how housing affects health as a kind of social determinant of health, but also whether interventions to housing and regeneration impact positively on health or not. And as one always says at this point, it's a bit more complicated than that, it turns out, as I'll say in a second. So this is my only other slide. I just wanted to kind of bring up a number of issues that strike me as somebody who's still pretty fresh and new in this area, but the only thing I am fresh about, I guess. First of all, that this whole issue, and I know it's something that Susan has worked on in the past, about this causality between housing and health, about how that works, is quite complex. And these big reviews of Cochrane reviews and such like of housing and health suggest that the evidence isn't that compelling, that a lot of it isn't actually really aggregatable, because people are using different things to understand what's going on. Sometimes they're using different forms of research evidence which have different levels of, this is quantitative research I'm talking about, different levels of certainty attached to it. And that is still, I think, the case today. There's just been a really interesting study from the University of Manchester as part of a major housing, health and retrofit piece of work that's going on in the Combined Authority. And they also have come to kind of the same view, that looking at the last 20 years of research between housing quality and health outcomes, they find it really hard to assign strong confirmation of the evidentiary link between the two things. So we all feel it intuitively. We all see the qualitative kind of strength of the argument, but the quantitative evidence isn't quite like that, I don't think. But I do think the things that Susan was saying about that kind of case that one makes for the health case for social housing investment is often persuasive to people working in either community, but it's obviously convincing government of that. And one of the arguments that we looked at in our work with the Scottish Federation was the kind of preventative argument that there was an ability to use housing as a determinant of health outcomes by changing what housing is and what people inhabit. You can change health outcomes over time, and view that as a kind of preventative benefit, that there's cost savings to society, to the individuals, and to the taxpayer. But that in itself is a really complicated thing. It's really hard to make prevention stick. There are certain specific ways and examples where it does, but we have these rational silos where individual groups don't see the benefit. You can't cash the benefits in an effective sort of way. We did find quite a lot of positive evidence in our retrofit work that there are positive health outcomes, at least in the short run, attached to really good decarbonising retrofit work, close to net zero. But again, the question then comes is, how do you scale that up? Our project in Glasgow was very expensive. It was a demonstration project. It cost an awful lot. I'm also doing a lot of work, again, new to me, in homelessness. And one of the projects I'm working on is a test and learn project that the government is funding through the Centre for Homelessness Impact. And we're looking at the role that, as an RCT, of how bringing nursing staff out in the street to tend to and work with rough sleepers, whether that has a demonstrable impact on housing outcomes or not. And again, we just started that, but we're going to do a cost-benefit analysis of that. So I want really just to finish off by saying that I think it's clear that these things are intermeshed in all sorts of ways, but it's really quite hard, I think, to disentangle what's really going on underneath it. Just the other day, I saw some work that the consortium Cypher are doing, also in Manchester, about housing and health and retrofit, and they built quite a complex causal loop diagram, a kind of systems approach to thinking these things through. And I think that's actually very attractive, because it means you can't shy away from the complexity of what you're looking at, but you can, by using those things, hopefully find where the big levers are, which can have the leverage to actually make changes. And hopefully that's what will happen in the future. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, my name is Virginia Barbaro and I work as the community manager for the Molise Calvarate district in Milan, Italy, under Aller Milano. Aller Milano is a public economic body that owns and manages a portfolio of public housing units located within the municipality of Milan and its surrounding province. Aller Milano is the largest public housing organization in Italy and one of the largest in Europe. In 2021, Aller Milano thought to expand its services to better meet the social and health-related needs of its tenants, improve the quality of living, and foster stronger relationship between residents. This led to launch of an innovative project known as the CASA project, and introducing and the CASA project was designed to enhance services in vulnerable public housing neighborhoods by creating multifunctional spaces called Casa Center and introducing a new professional role, the community manager. The community managers are a highly trained professional responsible for the social management of housing, with a particular focus on supporting the most vulnerable tenants. Currently, 6 Casa Center are active in different districts in Milan, precisely Grattosoglio, Giambellino Lorenteggio, San Siro, Molise Calverate, Mazzini, and Salomone. Casa Centers are multifunctional hubs hosting a range of institutions and services with the same goal, improving the quality of life for social housing tenants. Aller Milano leads the project, partnering with the public health services of Fate Bene Fratelli Sacco Hospital and 2 third sector organizations addressing domestic violence, Telefono Donna and Ebano. Since January 2021, I have been the community manager for the Casa Center in the Molise Calverate district within a social housing complex to foster continuous interaction within tenants and collaboration with the territorial network of services. This ongoing dialogue helps identify and resolve problems early, often in partnership with the third sector organizations and local associations. This space is shared with a healthcare service point, offering free anti-COVID and flu vaccination campaigns, a community nurse service, and telemedicine projects, access to a general practitioner, and psychological supports. As a community manager, my responsibilities are different, providing information and support for administrative procedures, actively listening to tenants to understand household needs, managing neighborhood conflicts, liaising with the third sector organizations and institutions to address tenants' needs behind Aller's direct remits, identifying and supporting the implementation of association-led projects, including the provision of Aller spaces within its buildings, and developing and maintaining a robust territorial network. Community managers so work as intermediary between tenants and Aller, at the same time between various internal departments and between tenants and external entities working in the territory. Somehow these help us to nip the problems in the bud and allows for a timely resolution. So the CASA project and the role of this new professional role, community manager, represent Italy's first example of social innovation and integrated management within public housing. After almost 4 years, the project has demonstrated excellent results in and improving tenants' living conditions and fostering a more supportive community environment. And so thank you for your attention, and thank you, Lydia, for giving me the opportunity to share our experience in Milan.
I'm Sammy Jo Hagan, and thank you for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here, and I work for Transition by Design, which is an Oxford-based cooperative and community interest company. And we do architecture, sustainable and ecological design, and participatory urban design. And this is for equitable, resilient spaces for a convivial future, addressing climate emergency and social justice. So I'm going to go through some examples of our community engagement and co-creation projects. One of our guiding phrases with this is projects done with people and not to people. And our principles here are for engagement to be inclusive, meeting people where they're at, diverse, reaching across demographics using a range of methods of engagement, and informative, so engagement plus communications. And then the framework we use is a consult, inform, and activate framework. So consult, gather input, inform, provide a platform for quality dialogue, and activate, empowering community members to take ownership and actively participate. So the example project is based in Blackbird Leys, which is originated as social housing project from the 1950s, 60s, for workers for the BMW mini plant on the outskirts of Oxford. For the past 14 years, there was a discussion about redevelopment of this area, which has recently gained planning permission, and this is an image of this. The community centre is part of this redevelopment, and it's set to be demolished and redesigned separately from that application. Here is an image of the community centre. It is well loved by the community, as seen here, for a celebration of the centre, which was a painting mural outside it before demolition. As part of the engagement, we held or attended 42 community events, and over 1,100 people were reached, which is about 1 in 12 people of the population of the Leys. The process included setting up a community review panel, user group workshops, public workshops, strategic comms, and public exhibitions. All of the feedback from these sessions was synthesized and sent directly to the design team. The culmination was a community exhibition of the co-created design ahead of it being submitted for planning permission, and a celebration of the collective work. We also do ecological and sustainable design. I'll go through some examples. And for our technical design, our guiding principle is build tight and ventilate right. And this is kind of the fabric first principles from passive house design. Looking at a good form factor, optimizing glazing, draft proofing, continuous insulation line, and high performance fabric, as well as effective ventilation for healthy and comfortable internal environments. And another consideration there is for the embodied carbon of the material choices. As well as the new build, retrofit is a key part of our work. 80% of the housing need for the UK for 2050 already exists. So the buildings need to be fit for purpose. We have engaged in research projects. For example, this research project with Cambridge City Council, a guide for owner-occupiers to retrofit their own buildings. And as well as the wider strategic points, it also goes down to a granular level of producing a whole house retrofit plans, looking at the technical strategy, cost, and the carbon reduction of different retrofit measures. Finally, and very briefly, we consider the affordability of homes. We worked with Tame Community Land Trust as one of the projects we've done. And this was a design for 31 low carbon, truly affordable homes for Tame, designed to meet passive house standards. The Community Land Trust is a community developer. None of the trust members will live there, but it's a part of providing homes which are affordable in perpetuity. So this project include the technical design, but also speaking with the land trust about what is needed. Thank you.
Thank you all our speakers, also in particular to the youngest one, because they were not very expert in giving presentations as the academics will do because it's their job and also out of their experience. So I really thank you for the effort. And now I will open the floor for questions and reflections. So if you raise your hand, we will come along with the microphone. Please also introduce yourself before making any comments.
Hi, my name is Jules St. Martin. I work as a developer in affordable housing in New York City and also mainly focused on retrofits. So my question is for Virginia. I'm wondering if you know about the funding process from the Lombardy region and the EU for funding the CASA project.
What do you mean exactly? I mean,
I guess how was this project, how was this initiative started, and what allowed it to, come to fruition, and how was the actual finances for this put together?
it started to try to start with a new project and try to innovate and make a difference in the context, because normally Aller Milano normally look at only the managing of the residential, the social housing. So we realize that it's not possible anymore to look at the social housing only from our approach and avoid the other variables that are connected. So we realized that it was important to make a project with all the entities and association related. So we decided to apply for funds, European funds, and with the collaboration with the Lombardy region, we try to make this innovative project to try to manage the reality from different point of view. So from the social housing and also from the health issues. And
If I can help Virginia, as I am from Milan, I understand the question. Also, more structurally, we have three different levels of welfare structure. So at the regional level, we manage both health services and housing services. So basically, they were all together in Regione Lombardia. So this was, I would say, one aspect that facilitated the application for this EU funded, this POR FC 2014. 2020. So they partnered with a big, I would say, a hospital, to make you understand, but a hospital is not just a hospital, it's a big hub. One of those, Milan is a very large city in Milan, which is Sacco Fate Bene Fratelli. And so they partnered all together, also with some specific third sector organization, anti-violence, anti-domestic violence, and so on. And they built up this project that was successfully funded. There was also Politecnico di Milano, I think, as an academic partner within the application. So it's an example of placing together public bodies, academia, and third sector's organization, just to try to set up an innovative project to be successfully funded. I don't know if I answer your question.
Yeah, completely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
It's a question primarily for Susan. I was really struck by what you said about creating a system of care. And I was wondering what you think that would mean in practice. What would be the practical steps that we might take? Other examples of, sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Josh. I work for Oxfordshire Community Land Trust. And we've done some work with transition by design. And the other part of the question is, are there organizations out there that have embedded an ethic of care explicitly at the center of what they're doing?
Thanks for the question. So I don't know how many of you are academics or whether there are any geographers in the audience, but there is a journal called Antipode, and interestingly, just this year, a really interesting collection of papers has come out in Antipode, which actually documents a number of housing movements from the States, actually, quite a lot of them, which absolutely take care as their centerpiece. So I think for specific examples, it's very interesting to look at that. One of the things that this is a sort of negative way round to answering your question, but one of the things that I think is a problem in housing at the moment is that it is absolutely strapped for cash in all of the areas that could do anything more than deliver something which people need more money than they've got to pay for. So the problem at the moment is that the more strapped for cash the housing sector becomes, the more that governments and pragmatists and anybody who wants to get housing working is forced to look at flows of funds which are not only there to invest in housing, but are also there to extract profit, to give to shareholders and companies and bonuses, and it flows a lot flows out of housing, even though it looks like an investment's coming into it. So to do the sorts of experiments that we might want to have in order to try to meet a wide range of needs that you could say are about, caring for the public and homing people, giving people a sense of groundedness at the centre of their life, are just not there. Now, it's interesting that you say that you work for a community land trust, because it's precisely those areas of work, thinking about different ways that people who occupy homes also have a stake in the ownership of them, can keep them, as part of their own domestic project, is precisely, I think, where we can look for interesting ideas. And there are lots of experiments about with different styles of ownership and occupation of property that give people a chance to build into housing environments a whole range of other things. And if you take a country like the UK, we're going to need it now, because we've got another round of care in the community coming forward. So if we don't have housing developments that can help people with different needs link into care services and caring structures, if we've got a housing system that makes people feel absolutely stressed all the time because they can't meet the costs of it, then we're never going to be able to do that. So I don't know whether I've quite answered your question, but I think my high-level answer is that we need lots more. We need to find a way to fund lots more not-for-profit experiments that give people imaginative ways to control and use their residential environment, because I think that is a way to promote well-being and resilience for communities. Sorry, that was a bit of a long answer, sorry.
Yes, I think it's finding a way to make tenants owning their home space.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Sara Zella. I'm working at the Office for National Statistics, but also associated with the University of Oxford. And I'm particularly interested in the topic of aging and looking at aging health and well-being in older age, in particular through the life course perspective. And the final aim at the end is try to be healthier when we become older. And I'm wondering if in your research, I know that you touched already a little bit this topic, how can be a good house or healthier homes help to also aging better. So how we can arrive at the end of our life somehow with the help of having a better home.
Is this a question for Ken?
Yes, or anybody who wants to answer.
Okay, well, yeah, thank you for the question. It's a really critical issue for the housing system as it evolves into the future. And actually, a point that was made earlier about the importance of the housing stock is important in this. We might well change the regulations in a progressive way for new build housing, but the stock dominates the flow of new supply. There's no escaping that fact. We need to find ways to adapt properties, make them more livable, etc., so that people can age in place, as it were. That raises a whole set of policy issues about the fitness for purpose of how we do housing support, how it operates, how it's funded, how it's delivered, the governance of it, the partnerships that are involved in it. We are doing a little bit of work in Scotland about the funding and delivery of the mess that is housing support in Scotland. It's funded in all manner of different ways. It's invisible as well. It's not a priority because people don't get that it's actually a range of different things with different purse holders and different people thinking about what they're trying to achieve. But if what you're trying to achieve is well-being and better health and being independent for longer, etc., and having the right kind of housing, it needs to be a coordinated effort with a certainty over the funding and how long funding lasts, and that it's efficient and it's good value for money. I'm not necessarily therefore saying there needs to be like a national care strategy or whatever. We just need to have a more visible or better organised way of doing it. But it's a really important issue. Ageing is important in all manner of ways in housing. One other way that's always worth saying is that we now have cohorts of people who will never own, who might have started their working life thinking that one day they would own and have assets in housing. And the fact that they don't, and as they get older, will mean that it'll have implications for the levels of pensions they've got, because they're still going to be paying rent in their retirement, have implications for the benefit system, that it's really not clear that governments are taking sufficient account of that future risk that lies up ahead of us.
Another thing which thinking about sort of housing and for aging is with retrofit projects and also new build projects which are done to a really high quality. There's a really big improvement in indoor air quality and how that affects respiratory conditions. So if you think about how people over a certain age, they're eligible for free flu jabs and COVID jabs. Indoor air quality can really help with that, and it's kind of the question of what if retrofit or good quality housing was done on prescription, and how that could change or improve life in older age.
Hello, I'm Keith Watson. I'm doing the Masters in Sustainable Urban Development here, but I've also worked for Peabody, but I'm very much here in my own capacity, but it's great to see the Blackbird Leys Community Centre. I know I'm not involved in it, but it's good to see. There's just sort of two maybe sort of observations or comments, but the passive house is obviously something that's been mentioned, and that's like a technology which is, you know, from a continental technology, if you like, sort of dry climate, probably works quite well in the south of England, but just in Scotland it's been rolled out by the government, obviously different climate. I just wonder, there's also, and you mentioned about the air quality, they're very sealed environments with quite often plastic off gases. Is there any health concerns or long-term research there, or, you know, in the panel that you're aware of, and but either about damp or about the impact of the air quality? And just the second observation was really with retrofit. The biggest challenge, I think, that we've sort of or when I say we, Peabody have done studies into how to convert their historic stock. And I think one of the biggest challenges that came out of that is really the logistics of keeping people in their house and not avoiding sort of double decants and all this kind of stuff, which impacts on cost, but also just, is disturbing to people. So I just wondered if there was any ideas there.
Kind of feel that it feels like a planted question, just because it's no. Just what I mean by that is just it speaks to what we did in Nidby Road in Glasgow in a really persuasive way. So we had an expert in internal air quality from the University of Strathclyde, an architect who'd worked during COVID about exactly the same issues. So we had a Enerfit standard, which is effectively the retrofit version of Passive House. That was our aim, and critical to that, with a kind of the sealed kind of unit, airtight unit that you try to create, is the use of mechanical ventilation. And it seems that if you even go 2 weeks without using the mechanical ventilation properly, you'll start to get serious damp and condensation. So there's a really important behavioural part about the way in which the residents use the property. Yes, there are phenomenal energy savings, cost savings. This was like in 22, 23, so it's really important that social tenants were paying, in our case, £40 a month for their fuel and their energy costs. It was absolutely phenomenal. But as I said in the presentation, it did cost a huge amount of money to do it. But yeah, we were very lucky because we had an empty block of 8 empty units, which we filled with social tenants when it was ready. But clearly in Glasgow, where a quarter of all the properties are Victorian tenements, this is a massive undertaking. It is very expensive. The scaling up of it, the decanting of it, all of those things are really complex and made much more complex because it's typically mixed tenure. Each block, you'll have owners, you'll have private landlords, and we don't really, our tenement law is archaic. So it's really hard to get people to work together or to have an incentive to work together. So we have to wrestle with all of those problems. And the conclusion I think Glasgow City Council came to was that this was a very interesting demonstration project. There are lots of good lessons to learn. One of them is not to go for Enerfit as a standard because it's too demanding. The Enerfit standard was too demanding with Victorian heritage properties, which there are huge hidden costs under the surface that are very, very, very challenging. It's a very heterogeneous kind of stock. So we could maybe talk about this after the thing, because lots and lots to say.
Yeah, also just to add to that, kind of a similar thing in some research projects that we've done for the Cambridge City Council project and others, is that actually the kind of biggest cost for retrofit is the kind of very last bit, trying to get towards the Enerfit standard. And actually, if you're thinking sort of the cost benefit analysis, kind of going to something which is called the AEC-B standard, or something called LETI, is actually like the best target, and is considered climate safe. And so that's one way to kind of go down that route. And I mean, Enerfit is the gold standard, but I don't think it's very practical for all retrofits to be going for that. And I think maybe the first part of your question or provocation was to do with the effect of climate, different climates in how you retrofit. So you gave the example of Scotland. Sorry, go on.
In Scotland, it's about the risk of damp, but also just the thing how VOCs and whether technologies explored, like breathable, which is old ideas, but reinterpreted.
Yeah. It seems kind of counterintuitive, but you can get airtight and breathable construction. And it's to do with the kind of the characteristics of the fabric. So with kind of older pre-1920s retrofits, you have to use a breathable insulation because you need to make sure that the fabric won't start to degrade underneath the insulation. So that's a really important part. And also for if thinking about like the passive house or NFIT standard, that technology has come from Germany, but actually done well, the passive house planning package or modeling looks at different climate information. So if you're really truly doing it well, you can't just use the same the kind of same approaches for all housing across the whole of the country or whatever. You really have to go specific. And kind of it feels hard, but a building by building analysis is actually what you need to do. But one way you can do that is kind of going for an archetypal analysis. So a Victorian tenement in Glasgow, there's going to be a lot of similarities there. So you make a plan for that type of home in that climate. And VOCs, you just have to be careful with what materials that you use and have very good ventilation, which is important for retrofit in general to avoid damp and mold and things like that. So that needs to be considered. That was quite long, but hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, we have. Also, while we shift the microphone, I'm also interested in the intersection, having done research between Dublin and Milan, which has very different urban microclimate, but actually is a changing urban microclimate because we are like in Milan experiencing a more and more very, very super hot summertime and then a lot of floods and some kind of storm, very, very big storms and flood in seasons where we didn't used to. And so it's a kind of, at least at the European level, this is a problem for all those buildings that were built up around the 30s of the last century, where actually social housing started to be built. So it's different microclimate at the urban level within different regions of Europe, but actually kind of the same problems, even though the material, the construct of which these buildings were constructed might be different. But this is a problem for people that might study, environmental conditions. I'm a sociologist. I don't get that, but I can get, I can just call for more research to be done in this. Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you all. Very fascinating talks. My name is Sophia. I'm a planning solicitor. I work in Bristol. We do renewable energy, sustainable developments, biodiversity, etc. And my question really relates to the evidence base, because I think a couple of you have touched on this kind of the causal relationship between housing and health. And that really is very interesting, because when I was living in London a year ago, there was a big case in relation to a toddler that died in a social housing development, and it was months and months of reporting that the tenants have done around the black mold situation, and they were completely ignored. And the coroner, they've done various tests, and that the cause was definitely the respiratory conditions as a result of black mold. So it seems a very clear analysis there. And in terms of the legal change, it was really setting kind of the deadlines for the landlords to respond to queries, rather than anything else that was a little bit more, I guess, helpful in that respect. And I just wanted to just ask a little bit more, if you can expand on the difficulty, I guess, when we have such clear cases that establish this causal link, especially given a social housing development. It's not even private landlord that we're looking at. This is the social housing. So it would be really helpful. Thank you.
It's quite a tricky one, the whole, because an individual causal links, you can look at case by case in the law, and you can look at individual pathways. I think the point that Ken was making, if I might just, I think you were saying that when you look at aggregate studies, it's very hard to really see exactly what's going on. And But I think my intervention in this is more, it's a kind of best is the enemy of the good kind of thing, because we know two things. We know that there is a relationship between damp, cold, mouldy housing and a number of physical health conditions, including asthma. And we have seen that demonstrated over a number of years. And I wanted the opportunity, which you've just given me, to remind people of a fantastic series of studies that was done in the MRC Medical Sociology Unit in Glasgow, led by Sally McIntyre. And they did a longitudinal kind of set of studies. I think it was called Glasgow 2007, was it? Something like that. It's really worth looking at that because they have assembled some quite good evidence bases, and a number of other people working around that centre have. It's very difficult to press these things home because people have always wanted to have very, very tight cases. But so we do know that damp, cold, mouldy housing is bad for certain health conditions. And we do know that when we've got a residualising sector, such as the council sector, we're going to disproportionately have people who might be vulnerable to that. Perhaps large families, perhaps overcrowded circumstances, perhaps more vulnerable families, perhaps families who have already got health conditions which prevent them buying into other sectors where they need more financial flexibility than they've got. And the other area where I think we can be fairly confident is that housing affordability stress is very stressful, and it does lead to low well-being scores or high scores on mental ill health. And we might not be able to say for every additional pound of affordability stress, there's a decline in a mental health score, but I think we can be confident from a range of studies around the world that housing affordability stress is a very bad thing, whether it's on the edges of owner occupation where people have mortgage stress, in the private rental sector where costs are climbing, or indeed in the social sector where, we've had, in both the private rented sector and the social sector, we've had changes in uplifting costs and decline in benefit support. So I can see how difficult it is to justify very large inputs on the and Ken can speak to this about some of the difficulty of these cross-sectional studies really hammering these things home. But I think my challenge to policymakers is you don't need to make it perfect. I mean, it'd be great to have the passive house standards and, to do really a complete refit and make it absolutely, it'd be great. You don't have to do that in the first instance. You just have to tackle some of these really widespread issues, which are damp, cold, mould, and housing affordability stress. And we can do that. We could make things better on that front. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to say two things as quickly as I can. The first is that I'm actually examining a PhD just now on Monday with Emma Baker, actually, and it's about the life course in the private rented sector and the evidence with cohort studies going back to 1970 that show that mental well-being is worse in the private rented sector for children growing up, for families, for middle-aged people. It's considerably worse than it is in the owner-occupied sector. Actually, it also shows, the data shows, though, that this is a subject of the PhD, that social housing's worse in most respects, which is quite important to say. So those issues about, and that's how you can bring quantitative and qualitative evidence together, it seems to me. The cohort studies are really robust and strong statistical pieces of work, but at the same time, they're rationalising their findings from the qualitative work that suggests that precarity, insecurity in private renting is the driver, and the affordability, financial challenges that come with that. The other thing I would say, though, as well, is thinking about the social housing organisations in Britain today. So I'm on the board of a housing association in Scotland, and we respond to what the regulator tells us. And I think there's a culture of response, reactiveness rather than proactiveness. So we now have a series of high-level risks, which are all health and safety risks. And I think that's the kind of initial way that the regulator, both in England and Scotland, responds to these things. They force you into a much stronger line, and you divert resources and capacity into dealing with these things, be it your electrical safety, be it your cladding remediation, be it damp and mould, and damp and mould's the number one thing at the moment. So there's a kind of regulatory imbalance in a sense that creates a culture where you respond reactively because you're getting more and more requests of things that you must do, and that doesn't really create the space, and it's back to Susan's, infrastructure of care. The care ethic isn't there in the same way as a social enterprise is trying to find a way to keep the regulator from their door, essentially, and that's the part of the culture of social housing, unfortunately.
Can I just say something based on that particular case? Lots of people of my generation, who were working, 20 years ago, perhaps even 30 years ago on these issues, we all wrote to the newspapers and we said, we knew this. They must have known it. So, I think there are, I think Ken's absolutely right. That there are things that people know or that organisations know, and there are regulations that they respond to. And first of all, they respond to the regulations. And that's a tragedy in many cases.
Thank you all. So as you can see, we started from some social reflection from myself, and then we delved into more political discussion, economic, also in terms of like how institutions also play a big role in this, and in terms of architecture, construction, building, even climate reflection. So we could go on forever, but we need to wrap up, and I really thank you for this very interesting and engaging discussion. So we have some refreshment. I just want to, and you're all very welcome to stay and join us for some more informal discussion. I just want to remind that this session has been recorded and will be available on the center website in the coming week. And if you would like to share with others, please feel free to do it. As you can see there, the center held another seminar, a new seminar on Wednesday, January 22nd. Thank you again for your engagement today, and as a special thanks to everyone behind the scenes who have made this event possible. Finally, please join me once again in thanking our panelists for their wonderful contribution today. Thank you.
And if I could just add our thanks to Lydia for chairing. Again, thank you to the panelists. Talking of Passive House, I think you might be interested. This is Oxford University's first Passive House that was built some 10 years ago now. So this is a living example of what can be created. And just to plug the seminar, which will be week 1 of next term, so that's 22nd of January, on polarisation and how can we address polarisation through community dialogue. And it's building on a project we've been running called the Listening Exchanges, where we've been focusing on the polarisation in some parts of Oxford, in particular around the low traffic neighbourhood policy, and how we can create community dialogue to address some of those tensions. We're going to have 4 fascinating speakers along those lines, so do join us if you can on the 22nd of January. So thanks very much, and do join us for drinks at the back, and thanks once again to the speakers.